Let's start by creating a new Nodejs project and import the necessary libraries. And now let's configure the folder where we will store our database configs. Inside this folder, we create a MySQL.js file. In this file, we import the MySQL library and establish a connection to the MySQL database using MySQL.createPool. The host and port are default values, but the user, password, and database should be changed based on your MySQL setup. And finally, let's export our connection using module.exports. So now that we exported the MySQL connection, let's create a routes folder to handle the HTTP requests and responses to and from the MySQL server. Inside this folder, we create a adduser.js file. In this file, we import the express and router libraries, as well as the MySQL config file that we created earlier from the configs folder. Using the route.post, we can send data to our MySQL database. In this example, we use the adduser route, but you're free to customize the route however you like. We create a try-catch block. In the try part, we get the data from the request body and store it in the const data. Using the pool.query function, we can create an SQL query to the server with the data that was provided via the request body. The pool.query function consists of three parameters: the SQL query itself, the data, and the response. The if statement here will help us catch any errors. And the rest.json will return the response if the user was successfully added to the database. The catch block will also catch any other errors. Now the router.get function is used to get data from the database. In this example, we will be using the getUsers route to get all users from the database. We create a try-catch block, and inside try, we again use the pool.query function to get the data from the database. But since we're not passing any data to the database, the pool query function only uses two parameters, the SQL query and the response. If statement will help us catch any errors again, and if there are no errors, then the rest.json will return the list of all users from the table users. The catch block will catch any errors. Now we can export the router using module.exports to be used in other files. Now that we have configured our MySQL database and established HTTP requests, let's create the app.js file. So inside the app.js, we import the necessary libraries and import the adduser.js file containing the HTTP requests. Now we need to set up some basic middleware to handle our requests and response using JSON. Using app.use, we tell Express use user routes via auth. As mentioned previously, the naming of the routes could be anything, but this is the convention that's generally used. Finally, using app.listen, we will be able to start the Express server. There are different ways to test out routes, but the one I found to be the simplest requires to install a REST client extension in VS Code. Once we install the extension, we can create a routes.rest file at the root of our project. We specify the HTTP method, in this case, post, and the route. Since we will be sending JSON, we need to specify the content type to use application JSON. And finally, we provide the ID, username, and password in JSON format. Now let's create a database called test. And inside this database, let's create a table called users. And in this table, we will have an ID as an integer, username and password as strings. Now let's try to test it out. We click the send request button and we can see that we get an error. The connection was rejected. This is because we need to run the Nodejs server. So now that the server is running, we send the request again and success. We were able to send the request to the database. We can also test the get request to get all users from the database using the get HTTP method followed by the URL. Here is the result that we get. We could also double check by going back into our MySQL database to see that the user was successfully added to the users table. Thank you for staying till the very end. If you like this content and want to see more, subscribe.